good afternoon, and good evening to all. Myself Vaibhav. In today's session of Visual Jforex, we will be considering a key documentation aspect, the variable, which is going to be of critical importance when we will start developing the algorithms. So here in today's session, we will try to get familiar with this part of the basics, the variable, and if you are well familiar with programming, then you might be aware that a variable is key while defining and determining the value as well as the functionality. And here, if you consider the variable now as part of the Visual JForex documentation, then you will see that it has three critical components: the name, the value, and the data type. And in yesterday's session, we had considered the various data types. And here, the data type can be any of the type which we have already studied, and it is, of course, going to be dependent on what kind of function you are assigning to and what kind of end results you want. So that is going to be a key determining factor while defining any variable. As you might be aware, and if not, then this is the time to learn that a variable is only a symbolic name given to some known or unknown quantity or information for the purpose of allowing the name to be used independently of the information it represents. So basically, it tries to convey that once you define a variable, the value it can be assigned, reassigned. So the underlying value can keep changing, and in any programming structure, you will have that the name and the type of the variable is constant, but it will keep taking on different values at different point in time, and also it can be global or local. So variable is a pretty handy tool, and it helps us carry out various calculations, various logical formations, and without it we can't really build any profitable or even loss making algorithm. So you can say that any structure which we are going to build is going to rely heavily on the various variables which we are going to create, and some of the variables will be created by on its own by the Visual JForex platform. Some of them are already defined as part of the default variables, and some of the variables which we will create will be defined as users variable. So here this is a basic structure given of any variable, and if you want to create any new variable, you have to name it, you have to choose the data type, and you can assign any start value if you are going to hard code it, or if it is part of any output, then you don't need to assign start value, and you can also add a description, and depending on the limit of the use, you can make it local or global. Suppose the global is true, then it can be read for the whole of the algorithm. If it is false, then it will be restricted to the particular loop, and of course you can also create a group. Now coming to the naming is fairly simple, and all you have to do is start with any alphanumeric character. So mostly, and I think only alphabetical letters you can use to start. Of course, you can use numbers in the name as well, but it should not start with numbers or any symbols like dollars or undersign. And of course, subsequently characters maybe later, digit, dollar sign, or underscore characters. So as long as the conventions are followed, it holds well. So here is a brief example of the variables created which are in use now. So these all position, cycle position are variables. Even this cycle position here is a variable. Here I will give you a brief example of how to create the variables, new variables. If you see here on the left, you have this panel named variable. So in it, you have also sort of variables listed. And as I said, users variables are the variables which we will create intentionally, and we have to name them. Auto created variables are output of some of the calculations which are happening because of the structure. Suppose if we are taking any indicator, then the output of that indicator will be taken as a auto created variable. So that is it. And the default variables are inbuilt variables which are there to kind of cut down on development time, and these are essential. Without this you can't really develop the algorithm, so that's why they are there. And the default instrument is one of that variable. In it, if you consider the subtypes, then you have these pip size, pip scale, minimum trading amount, and trade amount, type, group, common, per contract, country. So here all sort of variables are listed, and any variable you create will be of certain types. And as you can notice here, str, int, dbl. So each of its type is also named here, and whenever you create a variable you have to define the data type, as I have said. Suppose if you take the example of the pip size, and here we can't really edit it. It is part of the default instrument variable, so we can't edit. But here you can see that data type is given and the name is pip size. And what it actually tries to convey is that, and the value it is going to take on is going to be dependent on the instrument's pips. And pip size is basically here, as you must be aware if you have been trading in the financial markets. So the pip size is the single unit, the least unit through which we define the instrument's value, the change. So here for the Euro USD, 1 pip is equals to 1 point, sorry, 0.0004. So after 4 decimal points, the pip is defined, and the pip scale is 4. Minimum trade amount, you have to define that as well. So here all these variables are there to help us create the new structure. And here this was of default instrument, then this is trade amount, default slippage, default stop loss. All these are int, the integer data type. And if we see this one, then there is the instrument data type, as you can see, and start value is taken as Euro USD. Suppose if you change this default value, you will have these options. Various CFD indices and currencies and even commodities are covered under this. So start value can be anything. Suppose if you want to take gold amongst commodities, then you can take it XAU in terms of USD, and global is true. So while you will be starting the algorithm, you will have to define these values, and it will be readable during the whole of code, the structure. Now moving on to the next set of variable, the count. So here you have these string variable. str stands for string, account ID, account currency. So here you can't really edit it. It depends on the currency of your account, and you will be determining these while opening the account with your broker. And the leverage, this is also of critical importance. We have to define the leverage beforehand, and that's where this variable comes handy. So here right now we can't edit it from here, but it will take into account the leverage on our trading account. Margin cut level, so all these variables need to be defined, and unless and until these variables are well defined, our algorithm won't really be able to function properly. Coming to the position info, we have these all position. We have these variables which take into account the current position on the current position in the market. So here also we can't go into the details of this variable. Let me try to explain to you with a example of new variable, and the data type I think is so this is the data type position. And now suppose if you want to create a new variable of data type position, then you can name anything. You can start with small or capital letter, and let us say my position. Then you will be creating a new variable here of the type position. So now we are going to save it. Suppose if you now go to users variable, here we have this variable, and now under the my position variable you will have these subtypes. You can say further information regarding that variable. Now when we created a only one variable, but then you can say that under that single variable these are the components, these are the freshly created variables which are actually the constituents of that variable, and any position will have these characters to it. So position id, position amount, close value, close time, comment, creation time, fill time, instrument. Here again instrument will have its own characteristics. So even when you create a single variable, you actually generate a whole lot of data, and these all other variables, and these have been created because we created a fresh variable, and as I said, these are the characters of that variable. So you will have these all values which will be taken into account by the data structure which we are going to build. So this is how the whole setup works, and I hope you have got the point here. So suppose if you want to, now we can't go into the details of that requested amount, but I would suggest that you try to create different variables of your preference, and also check out on their constituents, the characters, and you will be amazed by how much data is generated by creation of the single variable. Now moving on to the open position. So here you have this further classification, the position amount. Of course, whenever there is a open position on the account, we will have to know how much is the trading size, how much is the lot size, and this is the variable which will give us the exact amount of that position. And the pending positions, how much amount is open, how many positions are open, that information will be conveyed by this variable. Now moving on to the trade event. Here we have this message type variable. Now here we have further classification: trade message type, and text, and trade message position. And again we have these sub variables down the line, and every position variable have these constituent, these dependent variables. So here we will again try to create say a type of variable with string as its data type. So suppose if we choose string as a data type, we are not we let us define start value as var and its name will be variable data type. Okay, so here we have created a fresh variable. This is of string type. You can see here the type str. Now if we go and edit it, but one thing you might note that here we had this draw drag down list, but we don't have any further subcomponents of these variables, the string. And string, because it's a kind of fixed value, the value of whatever is written in text format is not going to change, so it is static. And because of that, because it lacks dynamic, we don't really need to be bothered much. And whatever text we are assigning, it will remain the same all over, so that's why it doesn't have any list. Now moving on to the onCandle variable. In onCandle you will have these further two last task candle and last bit candle variables, and if you go deeper you will again see these multiple dependent variables here which have been created because of these last task candles values. We have candle high, candle open, candle close, candle low, candle volume, candle period, and candle instrument again here. Since instrument has also its own characters, its own qualities, we have again these subtypes. So you can see the component structure of most of these variables runs deep, and whenever we are defining any variable, whenever we are creating any variable, we need to be aware of its dependent variables, the further variables which created along with it, and then we have to see how we can use those values, and of the critical importance of getting all these data structures right. On tick also you will have this last tick variable, and then every tick has these characters: bid ask, bid volume, tick ask volume, tick instrument, and tick time. So you have to take into account all these data points while looking at the on tick variable. So that's also a point of high importance. So basically in today's session we have tried to get familiar with the variables, and we have tried our hand on developing some variables on our own. So here, as I have said, whenever you are creating a new variable, you have to name it, you have to choose the data type, and then you have to assign a value if you want it to be used directly for any calculation or for any logical condition. If you are assigning, if you are going to use this newly created variable as only the result of any particular calculation which is there, or any output value of any indicator which has already been defined, then you don't need to assign a start value. And you have to always make sure that whenever you want two variables to interact, they should be of the same data type. Unless and until that is the case, you will find difficult to get the desired logic or desired calculation done by the algorithm in a desired manner. So that's why you need to pay attention to these all the components of creation of new variables. So that's it from my side for today's session. And if you have any query or any doubt regarding the variables and its uses, you can write it in the comment section, and I will be more than happy to take the discussion forward. Tomorrow we will most probably go into the repository and we will see some of the indicators. So for now, I will be signing off. We will be back tomorrow. Thank you all for joining. Goodbye.